This is a video series called Why We Write and How. I don't know where the and how, there's an exclamation point, so I have to say it like that. But it's basically a video series where I wanted to bring on other songwriters and kind of talk about like what drives them to write, so why, and
Hmm.
also like what that process looks like. Because
Mm.
for me, over the years, like people have always asked, like, Bradley, how do you write songs? And I always thought it was like, well, I would write out a story and then kind of go back and fit some music or whatever. But then when I was really thinking about it and like trying to actually like write it out on paper or whatever, I realized I didn't actually know. And it was sort of
Hmm.
like a weird process where like stuff just kind of comes out as it comes out.
Right.
And so I wanted to get other people, like hear how other people do it, because it's fascinating to me. So
Hmm.
anyway, so today we have Adam Reid Wilson. Adam's my friend. He's a fellow songwriter and musician, but he also owns and runs a music school called Learn Music. So he's actually more successful than most musicians, I would say. He's a very, very good businessman, someone I like to pick his brain about. But the reason I wanted to have you on was when I think of like an Adam Reid Wilson song, I think the things that come to mind are it's always seems very thoughtful.
Mm.
It seems very honest and very like purposeful.
Mm.
In addition to being like, fun to like melodic and like good to listen to. Plus your voice, it's like I could just listen to you sing all day.
Oh,
It's
thanks,
like one
man.
of my favorite voices.
Thank
Um,
you.
but it's kind of the thing that I was thinking. I don't know. I wanted to kind of, we'll get into it later, like how much of that is, I guess purposeful and like intentful. But so we can just start right at the beginning. So like,
Yeah.
why did you originally get into like songwriting, and like when did you first like pick up a guitar, and like when did you start actually saying like I need to get my thoughts out and I need
Yeah.
to start putting this down?
Yeah. So I'll kind of just start with the musical part first and then talk about the songwriting part. I've always loved music. And I grew up in Southern California in a town called Simi Valley. So it was a suburb of Los Angeles, Hollywood area. And so grew up just kind of by chance with a lot of great musicians. My parents hung out with a lot of really great musicians. So um, the guy who like helped me pick out my first guitar, he was a session player for the Beach Boys. Like just some like really, really cool. He was the bass player for Captain and Tennille too. His name's Mike Brady. And so I grew up around it. And I think that what attracted me to music in the first place was I love different things speak to different people, different kinds of art speak to different people. For whatever reason, harmony and rhythm have just always moved me in an unexplainable way. And
Okay.
so I tell people with both playing guitar, playing music, and songwriting, it wasn't this like I want to, it was like I had to. It's like I had to do it to kind of satisfy like these like primal groanings like inside of me. Like it's the only way that I could like, get rid of this like kind of call and or get rid of this dissonance in my life. Like I just felt like I've it's so weird. It sounds super mystical or whatever, but
Mhm.
I've just always had to play. And so and I've always liked to perform too, even before I got my first guitar when I was 12. So I always, before that, I did like some acting and stuff like that. And I've just always loved performance. And so, and music is such, at the time, I was born in '86. And so a lot of
Right.
cool music in the '90s. And it just seemed like a fun way, a really cool way to kind of express that need. So that's how I started playing. And then I hope I'm still answering the question. Sorry,
No,
this
yeah,
is a
absolutely.
really long answer, but
It's a big question. So
it is a
yeah.
big question. Yeah. So, um, and as far as songwriting goes, I've always been just like a thinker. I've always I'm always thinking about something, and I'm always trying to solve some problem in my head or understand some feeling in my body, and so uh, when I got an instrument, there were a lot of bands that I liked who were saying things that were expressing emotions that were very similar to the ones I was feeling. And so it's like, I wonder, and obviously I wasn't thinking about it. Sorry, there's people working in my backyard right now. And there may be random kids running through the background at any point. But so I just wanted to, it just seemed like a good way to kind of express a lot of what I was feeling. And especially when you're 11, 12, and there's all that teenage angst,
Yeah.
it just seemed like a good way to get that out. And then that became really addicting. So,
Okay.
like my dad likes to write, not music, but he just likes to write. And I remember him telling me when I was a kid, if I'm frustrated, if I'm mad, if I don't know how I feel, it helps to just sit down and write a letter. And he's like, especially, like if I'm mad at somebody, he's like, I'll write a letter to them. And 99 times out of 100, I won't even send it. He's like, it just helps me understand how I feel. And songwriting has always been that for me. It's been something that I do to understand how I feel and kind of to do some inward exploration. And so, and it's kind of like a vicious cycle. Like the more I write, even as a kid, the more I would write, the more I'd be able to process how I was feeling, and then I'd want to write more. And so that's kind of how music and songwriting, how it initially started.
Yeah, that's cool. And I totally can get on board with that, because for me, it was always, it was like the Asperger's, which I didn't know that I had at the time, because I just found out like not too long ago. Asperger's, for anyone who doesn't know, is like high functioning autism. And so I didn't even know that I wasn't able to process my emotions. And so like, for me, that was like such a big thing, was being able to like subconsciously even be able to do that through music. So it's like, it's such a cool answer, because it's like the same thing that I did, except for mine was a little bit more unknowing. But it was the only way that it like felt like I could actually get the stuff out.
Right.
Especially once I wasn't able, because like when I was younger, played sports. So it's like you could take it out on a baseball, or you could take it out on an opponent or something. But then I needed something else to do that. And
totally,
it's weird that there's like some desire for, I still don't know like what drives somebody to be like, I want to process this stuff like through me outwardly to you, like through this other stuff. I think part of it, like you said, is that want for attention. And like, was there anything specific that was for? Because like I've talked to some people, and sometimes it was like, well, I wasn't getting it from, my family or my friends or something like that. And that sort of pushed me to want to seek it externally. Is that something that you've experienced, or it was just something you just like getting attention? It's just, it's fun.
Yeah, I think that we all want to be recognized for something. And I think especially when I was that age, so I got my first guitar when I was 12. So, middle school, the armpit of human existence. And so I was just like, I was very much trying to find who I was. And I grew up, my dad was a pastor, and I grew up in church. And I have great parents. I think unknowingly, the environment I grew up in was pretty legalistic. And so there was this weird crossover with music and faith, where music was a big part of kind of the like evangelical church culture in the 90s. So I could express myself musically, and that was also mostly acceptable. Like, and so I think that that was a big part of it. It was almost just kind of by necessity. It's like, maybe there are some other things that I would have done to express myself or to find identity, but because of the legalism that I grew up in, it's like there was some crossover there that made expressing myself through music acceptable. As long as I expressed it a certain way. And there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, I think that also kind of sort of answering your question, I think that I didn't grow up in an environment where it was okay to ask questions, and where it was okay to question the narrative. And so, which is something I'm very passionate about now. And so I think that that was another reason why, not so much why I liked to perform, but why I liked to write, is it was kind of this safe place where it's like there was me and there was the song or what the song was becoming. And that was like the person that I couldn't interact with in real life. And so that's kind of a little bit of why I went that way too. I know that doesn't answer your question about performance, but I think it's worth noting as well.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because like I was listening to some of your music like recently just to kind of refresh myself and make some notes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that there is a common theme through a lot of this, where it's like there's the themes of like searching or like trying to find
Mm-hmm.
a place or a feeling or a thought,
Mm-hmm.
trying to learn something. So it sounds like that was like a big part of like what kind of drives you to do it, is like it's almost like
Right.
I want to be able to explore this stuff, and
Yeah.
this is a good way for me to, I guess, express that or try kind of dive into it.
Yeah, totally.
As opposed to just sitting with it in yourself.
Totally. And it's one of the only places that's felt safe for me to do that. I mean, not to get political, but we even see that in our culture right now, where there's just not a lot of room to ask questions. And so I think that there is like just kind of an okayness, for lack of better words,
Mm-hmm.
in songwriting to do that. And what's great is, even though the song's not a physical thing, it's like you can ask questions and sometimes the song gives you answers. And it's really great. You're like, you'll write something to try and understand how you feel or to explore a topic. And then this line will come out, or you'll have this thought, and it's like, oh, that's it. That's what I've been searching for. So yeah, the song kind of talks back to you in a lot of ways too, which is really cool.
It's weird how that happens. And I know it's because like, obviously they always say like you only use 10% of your brain and the other 90% is doing stuff behind the scenes. And I think it's especially true for people who are trying to like figure it out. Cause like, if you like sit down and you're trying to like just figure out a really hard problem, you're probably not going to. Right. And it's like when you're in this mode where you're like being more artistic or thoughtful or like trying to create something, it seems like it's easier for those things to kind of flow out naturally.
Yeah, totally. I don't know, I don't understand how it works, but somehow there's a guard that's let down. It kind of goes back to that safety thing, like it's just a safe place. And so there's a guard that's let down when we go to our instrument or when we go to a pad of paper that allows meaningful discovery to happen.
You mentioned you were born in 86, I'm born in 86. So we kind of grew up in that same like time frame. And there was a lot of like influential musicians. I know that stuff that like still resonates with me to this day.
Right.
So like if you had to like pick, like who would be like your like top 3 ones that like when you were first getting into it and first starting to write songs, you were like, those are my people. Like I want to be like them. I want to make music like that and say things like them. Kind of your top 3 songwriting influences almost.
Yeah. So I've had different influences in different stages. If we're initially, and these are kind of embarrassing, but like when I first started playing, this one's not embarrassing, MXPX. So I was like again, I could only explore certain types of music because of that legalistic environment that I grew up in. But there actually was like this cool, like unspoken group of musicians, I think, who were asking questions that were labeled as Christians, who are no longer labeled like that anymore. So like MXPX was one. And then, you had bands like Pedro the Lion and stuff. Who ended up, David Bazan's one of my favorites, but that came a little later. So in the beginning, like MXPX, Dashboard Confessionals was a really big one. And honestly, like Blink-182, probably that's just kind of what I gravitated towards in middle school when I first started playing. But then I remember I got really into Jack Johnson kind of on a whim. And my mom said, if you like Jack Johnson, I think you'd really like Paul Simon. And which is an interesting connection that I've never heard anyone make, but I see it, and so I started listening to Paul Simon, and that just opened up a whole ton of other stuff for me. So from there, I got into Dylan, and I got into some even like classic rock, like, you know, AC/DC and stuff like that. And then,
one of my favorites.
oh yeah, I love AC/DC, man. Just that four on the floor, straightforward rock and roll, so good. And then I got into bands like Iron and Wine. And so I would say right now, like if I had to pick my top three influences, like that I would say have shaped me the most musically, I would say Damien Jurado, Iron and Wine, and David Bazan.
Okay.
But yeah, those are, it's such a tough question to answer though, but those are like when I look at what I play now, where I've come, those have the most to do with the musician and the songwriter that I am. And I think that some of those guys, like David Bazan, was influenced by the MXPXs and kind of some of that stuff that I was too, because he grew up in that same, honestly, a very similar environment that I did.
Is there any songwriter, and this is something, this might be a question that doesn't pertain or whatever, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but is there like a specific songwriter that you hear it and you like wish you could do something like that, but you just like either physically can't, or like it doesn't quite make sense? You're like, how the hell do they do this? Like, I don't even understand it.
Yeah, I think David Bazan is that for me. And that's one thing that I've really had to learn is like music, like David Bazan makes me feel a certain way when I listen to it. And I've never been able to evoke that emotion in one of my songs using the same tactics that he uses. And so he just has he's a wonderful lyricist. He has a deep, rich voice, which I don't have. I have a very kind of high, soft sounding voice. And he just has this command. He has a way of commanding his instrument and commanding the composition of his songs. It's just it's so simple, but it's so purposeful, and just the harmony is beautiful. So yeah, I wish I was him, but I haven't been. While I'm highly influenced by him, I'm unable to do what he does in the way that he does it. And I admire him so much because of that.
Yeah, there's something mystical about how like someone can do it, because like you also mentioned Iron and Wine, like it's one of my favorites, and you like look at it and it's like it's all so simple. Like there's so many songs that are just like, this is just a 1-5-4 song, or like you know what I mean? But it's like, how is that happening? Like what's the mechanism? It's like so fascinating because you're just like, I could write those same chords with similar-ish lyrics, and like that doesn't happen for me. And
I had a really interesting conversation with a friend a couple years ago. We were talking about a Charlotte band, and he was saying, you know, they love Sigur Rós, and so they're trying to emulate that same thing. But the way that they're doing it, he said they're going about it the wrong way. He said they're trying to sound exactly like them, when in reality, the question we should be asking is, how does that music make me feel? What do I like the way about how it makes me feel, and how do I make people feel the same way? And I just thought that was really smart. It kind of gave me, I don't have to be exactly like somebody musically to evoke that same sort of emotion, but I do have to kind of go on my own personal journey and figure out how I create that, for lack of better words, like spirit in my song to accomplish the same thing that artist is accomplishing. And that was a big paradigm shift for me.
So when you're writing a song, like, are you thinking at all like how it might be perceived, or like what its purpose is, or like, you know, do you ever think about like, well, how specific and personal do I want to tell this story? Do I want to leave it open for interpretation? Like, do those thoughts kind of go through your head and like guide you when you're doing that? Or is it kind of just like, I just need to focus on the song and I want to tell the story that I want to tell?
It's option B. And in preparing for this, I was just kind of thinking through my process a little bit. And I think that songwriting is very utilitarian for me. So typically one of two things happens. Either I'm one of three things happens. Either I'm feeling an emotion and I want to understand it, so I write about it. Or I'm feeling a hopeless emotion and I want to feel better about it, so I write a hopeful song. Or I'm this is why all my songs are kind of sad too, and sort of darker. Is the third thing is I am frustrated about something and I kind of want to stick it to somebody, so I write about it. So typically my songs fall in those three categories, but the one thing that they all share in common is that I am feeling something strongly that I either want to understand or want to feel better about, or want to communicate to somebody the passion behind. And so I write about it. And it's very therapeutic for me. So, but I do, in that, some of the things that I do think about, I also do some like songwriting coaching at Learn Music for a couple students. I've done it throughout the years. And I do typically like to do that in the form of a story. So, like I have a song called The Sun Don't Get Lost. And I was going through a time in my life where I was just feeling very disconnected and very hopeless. So, and at the time I was expressing my faith in like a very typical kind of Christian evangelical sense. And so, I wrote this song about how like through Christ we have hope. But I didn't like, it's not like through Jesus we have hope. It wasn't like that. I didn't want to be obvious about it. Right. So, I told a story about an abandoned house, and the lyrics are, this old brick house ain't the same. It's cold, dark, lonely, and plain, begging for somebody to come in and light its fire again. So I'm really passionate about story. I also the song that I'm most excited about right now is one called Never Leave. And it's my newest one. I just came out with a video for it. And that is kind of, I'm not a basket case. Hopefully it doesn't seem like that in this, but I do feel sad a lot. And that's something that's, maybe I am a little bit of a basket case, mental illness, like depression and anxiety, something I've always dealt with. And it's something I'm really passionate about and I'm not scared to talk about. So about 2.5 years ago, I just got diagnosed with actually I hadn't been diagnosed yet. I was in the process of finding out that I had which you and I have talked about a lot. We actually share that in common. We both have vestibular disorders. And so I wrote a song about just feeling disconnected. And it was kind of about this man who wanted to be at home. He wanted to find home. And home was where his lover was. And so what I was trying to say is, life is really hard right now. I feel like a stranger in my body. I don't know what's going on. And I just want to feel good like I used to feel. But instead of saying it like that, I try to always like dress it up a little bit. And so the lyrics to that song are, I can actually play a little bit of it if that's cool with you.
Yeah.
I just so happen to have a guitar right here. So that song, it goes like this. It's the verses. Man, I need to find some rest, somewhere to unburden my heavy head, 'cause there's so much going on in my mind. Quiet is something that I can't find. And your presence used to be my home, but I lost my way some time ago. Now I'm wondering, trying to get things straight, 'cause I wanna be with her and never look away. Said I wanna be with her and never look away. So can you tell me, do you know how to get back to my home, where my lover waits for me? She said says come back home and never leave. She says come back home and never leave. So that's just kind of an example of like how I dress up like a really simple emotion through story. I have a friend who, one of my dearest friends in the world, his name's Jacob Early. He's a producer, and he told me one time he has that ability of being like brutally honest with you in the most kind way possible.
Yeah.
And he'd say, I like what you're saying, but you can say it better. You can say it more creatively. And so I think that I've just taken that and to answer your original question, what's going through my head, I think my process is I take a really simple emotion that I'm either feeling and want to feel better about, I'm trying to understand more, or that, like I said, I kind of want to share with other people, kind of stick it to the man. And then I dress that up in story a little bit just to make it a little more poetic and give it a more of a sense of mystery when people are listening to it, and try to make it a little more pretty.
I gotcha. So on that note, it's funny you brought up that song. I was actually going to ask you about that one because it's one of my favorite songs of yours.
Thanks, man.
So like we have kind of the thought process that goes into it, but like, what are kind of some of the nuts and bolts, I guess? So like, how does that start for you? Is it like start with an idea? Does it start with a melody? Does it start with like a couple of chords that sound really good? And like, how does that turn into a verse and a chorus and stuff like that? Like, how do you kind of go through that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically I'd say over the last 6 or 7 years, what my process has evolved into is typically I'll start with like a one-liner, you know? So for that song, I was literally feeling like I'm just so on edge right now. I need to find some rest. And then it's like, that could be kind of poetic. And then I'll start writing the lyrics first.
Okay.
And I'm kind of, even when I write lyrics, I'm kind of thinking about a melody. So those things kind of happen simultaneously for me.
Got it.
And so, and once I have a melody, it's pretty easy to put chords to that. And then, so it's a pretty like, there's not a whole lot of jumping around. It's a pretty like beginning to end, start with a line, add a little bit more on that lyrically, put some kind of musical bones to it. So a basic chord progression. And then I kind of finish those on the same trajectory. They're both kind of happening at the same time.
Got it.
Other times I will start with like a lick, like if there's like a cool little lick that I like, or like I like to sit down at my computer and like multi-track ideas too. So I'll start with something like that, and I'll put words to it. That process seems, and I'll kind of build out the idea based on like a musical idea rather than a lyrical one. That I tend to like the end result better when I start lyrically than when I start musically. I think what also helps me is that I'm a pretty straightforward guitar player. So I'm pretty much playing diatonically all the time. You know, for those people who aren't songwriters, meaning I'm sticking within the key. You know, I'll borrow chords from other keys occasionally. Like maybe do I like minor fours a lot, and like major threes and that kind of thing. Like if I'm playing in the key of C, like I like to go to an E major sometimes, maybe before I'm building up into a chorus, or you know, the old I'll follow you into the dark type. That trick, you know, but that's typically is like I think because I play within the key so much, the composition part is a lot easier for me than it is for most. I'm kind of a lyrics first, music second kind of guy. So really my guitar playing is just there to support and enhance my melody.
One of the things that I always think about, like, do Do you think about like, because you write your lyrics first, so
Mm-hmm.
they probably dictate like structure and stuff like that? Or do you
Yeah.
think like, well, I want to put a pre-chorus here or a bridge here or like whatever? Or is it kind of just like, well, let's see where this stuff takes us and we'll kind of use that to inform how it actually like physically goes together?
Yeah. So typically my songs are pretty mechanical in that way. Like I'm not mechanical in the way that like I always have to have a bridge or,
Mm-hmm.
there's obviously some freedom there. So what I try to do now though, and to be honest, I think with just having a business and having kids and stuff, I don't do this as much as I would like to. But uh, I don't know if you've seen that Wilco documentary, I'm Trying to Break Your Heart.
Yeah.
Um, so good. And there's a line in that documentary that really changed the way I think about songwriting. And Wilco likes to get weird, and I
Yeah.
love that about them. But Jeff Tweedy said something to the effect of, every song that we write, it starts as a folk song. It starts, acoustic guitar and vocals basically. But what we do is, we finish that and then we kind of disassemble it and attack it through the back door. That's
I remember.
big paraphrase. Yeah, that was a defining moment though in that documentary for me. And so I try to view songwriting now like I view like I would have viewed writing a paper when I was in high school. Like typically when I'm finished, like I really need to just consider that my first draft. And then I need to go back to it and I need to say, okay, what can I do to bring this to life? What can I do to add to this? And sometimes you'll start that process in, like even with Never Leave, I've been tempted to retrack it with drums and stuff like that, but I'm like, I kind of like it the way it is. It kind of does what it needs to do. But then I have another song called Politician that's more of like a rock and roll song. Mm-hmm. And like that's one that I actually, even though I've released an acoustic version of that song, I very much know that that's my first draft and that I'm going to go back and I'm going to proofread that at some point and I'm going to, have a different iteration of it with a full band. So yeah, I think by nature of just wanting to complete the song, it is very mechanical, like, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus out a lot of the time. But I'm trying to get better about going back and saying, okay, now that the bones are considering what I used to consider a finished song, the bones of the song. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Cause like that was actually gonna be my next question was, is it like an active process? Like once you're finished with it, like let's dig back in and see if these lyrics make sense, maybe tighten them up, maybe change a few parts.
Yeah, so I would say it's an active process, but it's a pretty laid back one. So typically I'll finish a song and I'll play it out and like I'll be like, okay, that feels good, which that almost never happens, and then and then so typically what happens is it's like, that bridge didn't feel right. I need to spend some time going back and figuring out what I can do there. This line doesn't feel right, or this chord change doesn't feel right. And so it's something that it's like I finished the song and it's like we're acquaintances at that point. And then like there's this month-long or couple month-long process of really getting to know the song and working on my friendship with that song, to stick with the cheesy relationship analogy. And in that there's a lot of things that I'll change. So it's not a like, I'm going to finish the song and I'm going to go back in a couple days and I'm going to sit down and figure this stuff out. It's sort of an organic process, but it almost always happens. And that's actually an area that I want to grow in as a songwriter, is I want to treat my songwriting like I treat my business, in a lot of ways. Like I want to be more structured with it. And that's a way that that's one thing that I really admire about you is I feel like you really put in the time with your songs and it shows. You take your songwriting very seriously. My friend, I don't know if this is true or not, but one of my best friends in California was telling me that later on, and it was either John Lennon or Paul McCartney. It was Paul McCartney. later on in his life that he would wake up in the morning and he'd like put on a suit and fix a cup of coffee, and then he'd walk over to his living room and sit at his desk and just he'd write from like 9 to 5
and just go to work.
just go to work. And I think you do that on some level, and I really admire that. Like, you're constantly honing in, you're constantly playing, you're constantly making better, and that's an area that I really would like to grow in as a songwriter.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I mean it.
On that, like, how often do you write? Because like I have talked to people who said like I try to sit down and write like, a song a month, a song a week, two songs, whatever it is. Or there's people who are just like, well, I need a reason to write a song. Like I need to be inspired by something, or I need a record that needs songs or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, where do you fall on
that? Option B. I think writing is very utilitarian for me. So I sort of write when I need to write. And I'm not, with my music right now, I'm not in a place where I'm like actively trying to make a record or trying to go on tour, trying to play gigs and stuff like that. So although I do hope to do that one day, or get back to a place where I can pursue it like that. I don't have that like pressure. I don't mean that in a negative way, but so I think I write when I need to understand how I feel, or when I want to say something.
So here's another question that I want to ask you. What do you think is the best song that you ever wrote? And is that your favorite song that you wrote, or do you have a separate favorite one, like maybe for sentimental reasons or something like that? So yeah, either they could both be the same one, or maybe they're two separate.
Yeah. All my songs are just so good. It's just so hard to pick one. I'm just kidding. My favorite song, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I have 3 favorite songs that I've written, and they're favorites for different reasons.
Okay.
So the first one that comes to mind is my song Politician. And I just get so fed up with political BS. And I'm not even talking about like United States government political stuff, like the game of politics. I just get so fed up with. So I used to work at a church, and we were positioned well to do some things for the community, really well. But at the end of the day, it just felt like a business. And we weren't able to do a lot of the things we should have been doing because people give money, and those people need to be happy, and blah, blah, blah. I won't go too much into it. So the song Politician is not about a specific person, but more about a situation. And the lyrics are, you're a politician kissing ass to make a living, and you're teaching your disciples to do the same. You're the captain of your ship, the commander of your army, but you couldn't care less about God or country, just what they can do for you. And then in the second verse, it flips it and it says, you're real diplomatic, making sure there's never static amongst the ones whom are funding your campaign, talking about like the tithers, but they're the captain of your ship, the commander of your army. They couldn't care less about God or country, just what you can do for them. And I thought, just even from like a debate standpoint, like I'm really proud of what I said there. And it's something that I wanted to say for a long time. And I think that it's something that a lot of people who grew up similarly to I did, or even different than I did, have wanted to say. So that's one of my favorites, because for me personally, like, people can write songs all like that who have way thicker skin than me, and it's nothing for them. It was a really big deal for me to write that one. So that's one of my favorites. The other one that comes to mind is Never Leave. Like I said, I'm really excited about that one right now. And I just think it's a well-written song. It's not like groundbreaking. It's not profound. It's just, I think lyrically and compositionally, it just feels really good. And so it's just like a product that a finished product that I'm excited to show to people. And then a third song that I wrote, that I would kind of say is my favorite is this one called Darling Like a Rose. And I wrote it a long time ago. I wrote it when I lived in California. I moved here in 2007. So that song's, I feel so old being able to say things like this now. That song's about 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I just, it's like the first girl that I was ever in love with, and like classic story, right? She like flirted hard with me for 6 months, and I moved too slow, so she went for the guy who played football, and just like typical music nerd loser, like losing the dream girl song. And and so it's like this really like coming of age song in some ways, but I wrote it in a way that I was really proud of. And I think that there's just a couple lines in it. Like the last chorus is, one day in the pouring rain, I'll be at your door. The streets will be on fire, but still I love you more than silly little love songs or things that tell me no. I'll love you forever, darling, like a rose. And I just think that is another one of my favorites because it stood the test of time. It's like a nice bottle of wine, it's like, so I was listening, my friend sent me some songs that we did in high school the other day.
Oof.
And dude, I couldn't do it. I sounded like, take all the nasaliness of like Sum 41, Blink 182, the worst emo band you've ever heard, and like combined the nasaliness. Like it was all like, I was that nasaliness and like embodied. And it was just so bad, so A-B lyrically, which I still tend to write like that, but just like in the worst possible way.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to see something that you wrote a long time ago and you're like, everything wasn't bad. I don't have to totally forget about that time of my life, so that's kind of a cheater answer, but those are my three favorites, I think.
Nice. It's cool because I like that for having like a different reason, I guess, is what sort of like, because it is strange because like, everybody always says the thing where like, oh, my songs, they're all like my children, I love them all or whatever. And it's like, it's really not true.
Right. Totally.
Like I don't know anyone who like actually thinks all of their songs are equally great.
Right.
Especially as you age, because you kind of age out of some of them because they don't make sense to you anymore. And that's something that I think is really strange that most people don't realize, is like, it's weird how like the meanings of things will change over time. And so it's like, you might have even written a song about a very specific thing and like, but like 10 years later, you're like, well, now it means this to me because of all my other life experiences. It's actually really funny. I was listening to your song, Sir. And it was like, that one sounds like it could have been written about, like you could have wrote it yesterday about what's happening right now. Cause it's like, all like, hey, there's a big eruption coming and like people have their eyes closed and they have to want to like know what they don't know. So it's stuff like that I think about. That's just like, it's so weird how like songs they're so alive. And like you said, it's like you kind of change them over time based on how you feel. And it's like,
certain songs can almost be prophetic in a certain sense. It's like, you need to write about this thing that hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen. And that's what I had forgotten about that song. That's totally how that one was. Like, I think part of it is, again, a little utilitarian. Like, I just pray that a zombie apocalypse will happen one day because I think that would be amazing. Not really, but you know what I mean? Like I wrote that on the heels of watching like 7 seasons of The Walking Dead in like maybe 2 months. But I also, but there's also kind of this, again, it's that it falls into that category of this thing that I feel that I don't understand.
Can you ever imagine a time when you would stop writing and you would just be like, you know what, I'm done. I've said what I need to say. Every single possible thing that I've felt or whatever is like, I've documented it. Like I feel good, and like just kind of walk away from it? Or because in your case, it's like more of a, like you said, utilitarian thing. Like, is that something you see like, when you're 75, you're still gonna be writing songs?
Yeah, this is actually something I thought about quite a bit. I think that I've had the fear that would happen, but it's never happened. So I say I haven't been writing a lot lately. I haven't been writing like the songs I would traditionally
Mhm.
write. I've been playing a lot of music and I've been recording a lot of ideas lately. Pardon me. And it's funny because right before that, I remember, Eric Fellner, I was talking to him, a guy that I work with, and I said, Eric, I just haven't picked up my guitar in a while. I'm scared that I'm done. Essentially, it's like I just don't have the drive. And I've had other seasons like that too.
Mhm.
I always come out of it. It's really hard for me. That being said, it's really hard for me knowing myself and knowing how opinionated I am. It's really hard for me to imagine a time in my life where I'm not going to have anything to say. So I would be shocked if I ever came to a point where I was just done writing. And I don't see that. I don't want that. What maybe one thing I could see is that I would my medium could change.
Mhm.
But I'd still be doing the same thing. The end result would be the same. And
Yeah.
just, do it through, I don't know, writing or making movies or something like that.
Yeah. I think it's funny you said that, because I feel like every musician at some point like has that fear where it's like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done it. I'm not really sure like how many more songs I can write or whatever. It's just like I think it's a very common thing, because like I don't know if
Yeah.
I've talked to anyone who said they hadn't thought about it at some point,
Yeah.
whether it was going to be by choice, because like, being a musician and putting yourself out there and making records and everything, it costs money. It's a lot of time and a lot of energy, like emotionally and everything.
Yeah.
So like people are either like, I'm just sick of doing that
Right.
for such little return,
Right.
or it's like, I just haven't done it and I just don't know if I can. And so I think
Yeah.
that's a thing that we all experience for sure.
Totally. Totally.